Welcome to It's All About the Questions, where learning to ask the right questions can help you achieve lifelong success. Now, here to help you ask all the right questions is award-winning author, international speaker, and business strategist, Laura Stewart.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to the show today. Excited to be here as always, and I've got something unusual for you today. And I'm going to throw a little aside in here as well. My guest is calling in from Pensacola, Florida, and my regular listeners and my local listeners, because I'm on iHeart, but I broadcast out of WAXE here in Vero Beach. Vero Beach has a different time zone than Pensacola, Florida. So if you didn't know that, your trivia fact of the day is Florida has two time zones, in case you did not know that. So my good morning, afternoon, and evening always has even meaning in Florida, because you just never know. So my guest today is really an interesting person, and it's my first Navy flyer that I've ever had an opportunity to interview. You all know that I love talking to military guys. My dad was Korean War Army. Lots of dear friends in the military, and I so respect and appreciate what our military do to protect us every single day. We read the news, and there's just so much going on in the world, and that's what we're being allowed to know about. I had Brad Taylor on a few weeks ago talking about his newest book, Daughter of War, but we really got into a whole conversation about Syria, North Korea, Switzerland, and a lot of other geopolitical stuff that's going on. Not usual for me on my show, but when people are writing things that make me think, that make me shift my perspectives, I really want to have them on the show. And Mary Riesberg, a dear friend of mine in Pensacola, recommended that I interview Kevin Miller. And it started out just because he's written 3 books focused on Navy and Navy flyers, but he's more than that. And I wanted to have him on the show. So, Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Laura. Really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, you know, it's exciting to have people who have very unique perspectives on the show. And as I've mentioned, military is just something that I really want to support and help you guys and gals in the military do and get your message out. And you're doing some really interesting things. Now, you're a Top Gun. You're that guy that flew FA-18 Hornets on and off carriers. You have, what, over 1,000 carrier landings?
Over 1,000. Yeah, that means I'm an old guy.
All right, so here's my one question. And I have way more than that, but I've always wanted to ask this. Is it any different, less scary, scarier from the first time you trapped and landed on a carrier to that 1,000th time?
It was a lot less scary. Sure, you'll always remember your first day and certainly first night carrier landing. That's a sea story into itself. But I also remember number 1,000, and okay, here it is. Wow, what a wonderful career, and savored every minute of it.
There are very few people that actually achieve the level of skill that you have had in the Navy. You were not only, a Navy flyer flying F-A-18s, 24-year veteran, tactical aviator. You commanded a carrier-based strike fighter squadron. You were in the Pentagon on 9/11. These are not small achievements. What drove you to want to put your life on the line and achieve the levels that you did with your career?
My father was Navy, and he was not a flyer, but I was exposed to naval aviation as a child, and it just clicked, and it's just I want to grow up and be a Navy pilot, and was very fortunate that I was able to do that. I was able to live my childhood dream, but it was the only I ever wanted to do, and there was really nothing all that remarkable about me, throughout my childhood. And I lived all over the country, as a Navy kid, going from school to school. But what was remarkable is that singular drive, and I was very, very fortunate that I was able to pursue it and have some success with it.
I would imagine that not only the flight training, but other training that you have to go through would be daunting, to say the least.
And Tom Wolfe wrote about this in The Right Stuff. It is you're climbing this ziggurat. There's every step in the ladder, and so flight school certainly was the hardest thing I ever did. A lot harder than college. And in flight school, the pressure was really on. We were told, okay, you guys are competing against one another for the types of airplanes that you guys want to fly. So if you want to fly a certain type of airplane, you better get good grades. And wow. And so we're studying all through the weekend, and there's physical aspects of it. There's survival training. Out in the woods, living off the land. All the water training, in full flight gear in the pool, and you're not allowed to use your flotation devices. You just have to swim and float. I mean, that's not easy. And then there's all the devices they put you in upside down. You have to escape. So all important. But it's just, every day was something new, a new challenge that you had to master. Then you go on to the next challenge.
And is the whole idea behind all of that training to see how you do in worst case scenarios?
Yes, absolutely. It's okay. This is what we're going to do today. Here are the contingencies. What if the weather? What if the airplane has a malfunction? What if this? What if that? And so we spend a lot of time in our pre-flight briefing and preparation going over all that. If this happens, this is how we're going to do this first, then this. Sometimes airborne things will happen that you didn't brief, but you have your training to fall back on, and you can come up with a quick plan on the fly, pardon the pun, and things work out.
I read a lot of books by astronauts and about the space program because I'm a total space geek. And I remember reading, I don't remember which astronaut wrote it, but he said that the process by which you go from being trained and selected as an astronaut and actually getting into space is they literally go through killing you thousands and thousands of times on paper.
Yeah.
And making you go in depth through every possible scenario. I would imagine that would debilitate and freeze a lot of people just going, well, that could happen to me. Oh, that could happen to me. How do you move past that? So, I mean, what is it about your brain, right? Because not everybody has this. They can see those what ifs and it freezes them. What is it about you and your brain that enables you to go, okay?
It's a great question, and I think that it was, first of all, you're drawn to flight. I was drawn to flight, and I wanted to fly, and not everyone does. And some people say, you could never put me in an airplane. I don't want to jump out of an airplane, as an example, and I never had to, thank goodness. But some people like to do that. But the level of training that we got, yes, all those scenarios. When you go through those scenarios in the simulator, or even just talking amongst yourselves in the ready room, you're going to know what to do if that ever happens. Astronauts are wonderful, and here in Pensacola is a Naval Aviation Museum, and I had a position there on the foundation staff for several years, and got to meet some Apollo astronauts. One is Gene Cernan. And Gene Cernan, who sadly passed away several years ago, and he said that night carrier landings were a lot harder than anything he did in the space program. He also said, and he was an astronaut in the 60s and 70s, and what was going on with his buddies at that time, the Vietnam War, and he missed it, and he felt bad that he missed the Vietnam War.
Wow.
Which was intense combat, and of course many of his friends were lost and captured. But to him, that was a real test. Now any of us will say, no, Gene, you were an astronaut, extremely dangerous, and did an outstanding job for our nation as absolutely sterling service. But he did feel that way. Interesting, isn't it?
I had never thought of it that way because I had never heard that quote about Gene Cernan, who I just absolutely love him, and he's not as spoken about as some of the other Apollo astronauts. But do you think it was because it was basically him going up against a thing, like the rocket going up into space and this other, versus what you had to do, which is, and the Vietnam guys, the Navy flyers and the people on the ground, you're going up against another person. where there's a lot of other factors and, the loss of somebody else's life versus just potentially your own?
I think so. In the Vietnam War, of course, pilots are deployed there for months and months and months, and they're flying over enemy territory day after day after day, sometimes twice a day or and night. Gene Cernan, of course, has the whole world, and astronauts like him, have the whole world watching, and it is very dangerous. Being on top of a Saturn V rocket and going to the moon and coming back, that's incredible risk, and they had to know their stuff. Amazing training. I find it the same level of risk, but I will say, putting yourself over enemy territory for weeks, months, that's pretty intense. And so I think that Gene certainly looked up to his compatriots that did that, but I assure you they all looked up to him too.
Yeah, anybody that's willing to put their life on the line to protect others has my respect to the nth degree. I can't even imagine it. My dad was Korean War, but he was stationed in Europe. He wanted to go to Korea, but his skill set, they needed him in Europe. He was in the Army Corps of Engineers, and they needed him prepping all this stuff to get to Korea. And my dad actually ran away when he was underage to try to enlist in the Army.
I think many of us can relate to that, and you want to go. You've trained for, in my case, I was a combat aviator. I didn't experience real combat until toward the end of my career. But you do want to go. Most people think, "Oh, what are you nuts? You want to put yourself in that situation?" But when you train for that, and that's what you do. Yes, you do want to. You're not going to force yourself in there, but if called, then you're ready to answer that call.
Is modern aerial combat anything at all like what we see in the movies, in Top Gun, in any of the World War II movies? I mean, is it really like that?
The easiest way for me to answer that question is to talk about the absence of sound. Now, in the movies, there's a soundtrack and there's explosions and all these noises, but in real life, it's silent. You're in your little cocoon. In my case, and so I've got a canopy and I can see everything. But we would come into a target area and then you just see some light bulbs going off, or maybe a Roman candle, just flares of light, and that's anti-aircraft, and you don't hear it, but you can certainly see it. Another memory is being over a target and just sensing muffled flashes of light going off underneath me. Again, that's an anti-aircraft that you're not hearing. So it's that is the biggest takeaway for me.
So then what I've seen in movies like Top Gun and all the other ones where the pilot and the Rio, the guy in the back, right?
Yes.
You're constantly looking and turning. It's because you literally have to have visual. Otherwise, I mean, there's radar to a point, but that is true. You guys have to swivel around quite that much when you're in those scenarios, just looking to trust your eyes over anything.
There's a terrific scene in Top Gun. It's towards the end of the movie. And they're in their final fight there, and you're looking at the radar intercept officer and in the back of the airplane, and then you see a bandit, if you will, go zipping down the left wing line, and he whips his head around to see it, and that is an actual scene that they took in the real airplane that they put into the movie, and it's a terrific scene, and it just gives you a sense of the speed, the closeness. Yes, your radar is going to get you to what we call the merge, and then it's eyes out, and you're maneuvering the aircraft. Extremely dynamic, very physical. Putting 4, 5, 6 Gs on your body and keeping it there as you're maneuvering. You're whipping your head around, trying to keep track of everything that's going on. You come out of it, and you've had a workout.
We've been very fortunate here in Vero Beach to have the Blue Angels here several times. And ever since I was a little kid, every time I've seen them or the Thunderbirds, There is something about the sound of that jet going overhead, and especially with the Blue Angels, the striking color of the jets, that makes me feel even more respectful and glad I'm an American. That, wow, look at what we've got, and these skills and the training that people are going through. Now, you're in Pensacola, where the Blue Angels are based out of.
Many of my friends over the years were on the team, as they say, as Blue Angel demo pilots, and they're just terrific guys. First of all, they're just great people to be around, and they're superb pilots. And people say, well, the Blue Angels, they aerial death-defying stunts. Well, they don't do stunts. They do very precise maneuvers that they practice. Of course, they're doing things that any naval aviator can do. We just don't do it at a couple of 100 feet in formation with 5 other airplanes 18 inches apart. But they practice it, and they spend a long time, and this is another hallmark of tactical aviation, and in briefing exactly what they're going to do. Then they go do it, and then they come back, and they spend a long time debriefing it and going over every little thing that wasn't quite right so they can fix it and make it better. I was privileged to fly with a team in the back seat 20 years ago. One of my buddies was on the team, and what a wonderful, unforgettable experience that was.
Is it scarier when you're in the back seat and can't control what's going on?
No,
knowing
not
you're
at
a
all.
pilot?
And of course, I'm flying, with my friend, and we took off from Pensacola, and we got out to sea, and he said, "Hey, you want to fly?" "Oh, yeah, sure." So I'm flying in the slot with the Blue Angels, and it was just a thrill. And this is a formation that we fly in the fleet from time to time. And so then we get to the crowd along Pensacola Beach, and he says, "Okay, I'll take the airplane back." "You got it." And he put us right underneath number 1, and I felt if I could stand up and back, I could touch number 1's tail. Like, it is very close and very loud. But I just had a blast, and just back there, watching my friends, just admiring their skill, and of course, waving at the crowd. What a great day.
They always take some locals up whenever they're in town, some person that will then go back and talk about their experience. And there's always some press person that gets to go up too. And I always laugh because the biggest thing they always say is, "I didn't throw up," or "I threw up," but it's like this badge of honor to have not thrown up when a Blue Angel took you in the back seat up.
Yes, well, I'm proud to say I didn't experience that misfortune. They want to show you the public the professionalism of naval aviation, and the Blue Angels are a recruiting tool. And it's going to be a little boy or girl that's going to say, "Wow, can I do that when I grow up?" And the answer is yes. And it's just a wonderful thing for the public to see the professionalism of our military.
The Navy flyers especially have played a fascinating part in American culture. The women want to marry a Navy flyer. There's something about that Navy flyer and the dress whites, Officer and a Gentleman, any of those movies, even the TV series Jag, the character Harm, he was he's a lawyer, but he's a pilot, he's a Navy flyer. What do you think the fascination is with America and Navy flyers?
Well, you asked that question. I'm thinking, well, I was in my choker white uniform with gold wings when I met my future wife at a wedding reception. She had her own life in Jacksonville, Florida, and did a great job playing hard to get. So we've been married now for coming on 34 years. I think the romance of the sea, I believe, is something about this. To go off on a ship over the ocean, and of course, in the past century, people were flying airplanes off these ships, and there's a lot of I would say independence. You take this airplane, you go over the horizon, and we have a job for you to do, and then come back here and find this ship and land on it. I think people are say, "Wow, that's pretty cool."
It's like the best of the best, right? Because there aren't a lot of people that make it to be Navy jet flyers.
If you go through the front door and you're physically qualified and you apply yourself, you can do it. And people say, well, what does it take to be a pilot? Well, you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. So if you're physically coordinated, and you need to be able to memorize things under some degree of pressure, and and not go to pieces when you need that information. And you're going to do fine if you apply yourself. I think that there's tactical aviators around the world, pilots around the world. They're all professional. They're all superb. There are Cessna pilots that fly Cessnas professionally and exactly the way they should. And I look up to those guys. I'm not currently flying anything right now, but yes, to fly off a ship, to fly a jet or a helicopter off a ship day and night, that does set us apart.
You sound so humble when you're talking about it. I remember a number of years ago, about 10 years ago, I met the head of NASA, who was a shuttle pilot, and I rarely get tongue-tied when I meet people, but when you meet somebody that does something that you've always wanted to do, and you meet him, I couldn't speak, and he just shook my hand, and my friend said she's just such a huge fan, and he goes, oh, I just put my pants on like everybody else, and we're just like nobody else, we're like everybody else, and I laughed, and my friend goes, yeah, but there's like 20 of you guys in the world that do what you do, and it does set you apart in some ways from a lot of the rest of the world, because you're doing things that not everybody gets to do. You're literally seeing the world from a different place.
Yes, and join the Navy and see the world. And I've seen some beautiful parts of it during the Cold War. Remember that? We spent a lot of time off Norway, up on up around North Cape, and that was what we needed to do in the 1980s. And of course, in the 1990s, spent much of my career in the Persian Gulf over the Arabian Peninsula, which is nothing but beige sand. There's not any color other than sand down there. That's all you can see. Everything is brown. But certainly would never trade those memories. And those space shuttle astronauts, and I know a couple of them, a couple of my squadron mates and shipmates, Jeff Ashby, Joe Edwards come to mind. I hope I'm not leaving anyone else out. Again, they're just terrific guys, and they volunteered for this training, and they were able to go through it just like flight training. But yes, I think they'd be the first to say just put their pants on one leg at a time.
All right, we're going to go into the national news break, and then we'll be back with more from Kevin Miller, 24-year veteran of the Navy flyer, over 1,000 carrier landings, night and day, out on an Air Force carrier. And he's going to be talking to us when we get back about some really interesting stuff that's going on in the world, and, about his foray into publishing as well. So we'll be right back with more from Kevin Miller and my show. It's all about the questions. Welcome back, everyone. If you missed the first half of the show, you're going to want to catch it on podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, or at it'sallaboutthequestions.com, and you can listen to the first half probably in a couple of days. I'll have the recordings up. I'm here with, well, actually not quite here in studio. He has called in from Pensacola here with Kevin Miller, former Navy flyer, FA-18 Hornet pilot. And he's actually been in the back seat of a Blue Angels jet when it was performing, but he's got over 1,000 carrier landings night and day. He worked at the Pentagon, and we've just been talking about a lot of different things. Kevin has a book series out, the Flip Wilson series, all about Navy pilots and stuff going on in the South China Sea and so many different things. So, Kevin, it's so great to have you on the show, and that first half hour was, wow, just so much. I loved everything we talked about so far.
Well, Laura, it's great to be back. Thanks so much. Enjoying it.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about how you became a pilot, what it's like to do what you do. But, you've had this life. I think I read that your last tour in uniform was a legislative liaison, completely different world than being the guy that flies off the carrier and is defending. Now you're in a different war of politics.
Yes.
And which is harder? I think I know the answer to that. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
Gosh, I sure wish I could have another night catch-up. I had fun in legislative affairs. My office was in the Pentagon, but my job was to be the answer person for naval aviation to the House and Senate. So that there would be professional staffers in the House and Senate, authorizers, and they have a question about, why are we spending $2.2 billion to buy 24 FA-18s? And so I'd give them the answer for that. Then there would be a staffer in a district, let's pick a state, let's pick Florida, that has a naval aviation question, so I would help get that young staffer that question. And I enjoyed it. It was, I found that the professional staffers, they looked like me. They had been around the block, and in the new world, the bodies were buried in the defense budget. The office staffers, I say office, the representative staffers are typically young, 20s, and don't have any background, but they're very bright, and they are quick to pick it up if you take a few minutes to explain to them. So it was a rewarding tour for me.
Did you get different perspectives on what was happening in the world when you're on a carrier active duty pilot versus when you were a legislative liaison person?
In legislative affairs, the focus for us was the budget. The monies that are spent today are going to buy equipment in a couple, 3 years. Right now, our defense budget, and I'm still involved in this, $700 billion, 730. The House is going to figure out what the allocation is going to be, and then they're going to give the military this money. Okay, military is going to get, and we'll make a round number, $700 billion, and that's divided. Each service is going to get their share, and there's cats and dogs, and from that, you're going to operate the service, but you're also going to buy things that wear out. You have to buy ships at regular intervals, and airplanes, same thing. And, of course, people who come and go. So all that is, it takes years to build a budget. Then Congress, they started right now, and in theory, this September they'll have a signed budget, and then the military executes the following year. Now, in theory, Washington, as we all know, doesn't work the way it should, and that's being kind, isn't it?
Yes.
But that's how it should work.
And we just had the recent shutdown, and I was reading the other day. I owned a tech services company for 15 years. I consider myself a geek still. And cybersecurity is something I've talked about a lot on this show. And I remember reading an article about how the government workers that went back that handle cybersecurity are really concerned about how many hacks might have happened when they weren't allowed in the offices because they were considered non-essential personnel.
Yeah.
And that's frightening because you would think the protecting our infrastructure, homeland security, all of that would be considered essential personnel, right? Versus non-essential personnel. What are your thoughts around all of that kind of stuff from your perspective as a military person? How do you justify or how do you handle what's happening, knowing what you see in the world? I mean, you're still a defense consultant.
Yes. In this recent shutdown, the military was not affected. Last year, the military budget was set for the next 2 years. The Coast Guard was, though. But Coast Guardsmen came to work every day, and they're deployed around the world and doing their thing, and not getting a paycheck for a couple, 3 weeks, and that absolutely affects their families. It's very bad. I've been in the military and during other shutdowns, and earlier this decade there was this thing called sequestration, and so this is the Budget Control Act, and this hurts the military because the military has to execute these contracts, and when there's no money to execute them, or you can't, the world changes and you have to buy new stuff, but you can't because of the restrictions in sequestration, the military loses a lot of money in penalties, and they have to keep using worn-out ships and airplanes longer than they should. It is a huge impact. But this is the battles that go on Capitol Hill. And the second, third order effects can be devastating. It's not good, and we all wish it wouldn't happen. But that's our reality.
Now, in your books, you talk about the South China Sea, and I know I've heard about this in the news. It keeps going up and down lately, and I worry because of what you said with older ships and this constant battle of we should fund our military, we should not fund our military. But why do you think people still go to war when we've seen no one ever truly wins? I mean, if you just put into context the South China Sea.
That's a great point. And in recent decades, the United States has not won. Wars end, and in my career, I got to go to Newport, Rhode Island, and go to War College, which was a wonderful year, learning about history and about our country, about the world. But wars end when the loser stops fighting. So if we stop fighting for whatever good reason, then the enemy is still there, and they can think that they won. Our enemies in World War II knew that they were defeated, and they said, "Okay, we're done fighting you guys, and we'll cooperate with you." Desert Storm, which was the war that I kind of grew up with, that was a truce. So we told Saddam Hussein, "Okay, now, all right, we're gonna stop fighting you, but here's our conditions, and if you break any of these conditions, we're gonna come back." Well, he did within months and years. For the next 10+ years, guys like me were still fighting that war throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, before we had to go back again in 2003. It is very, very troubling, and not many people know about the geopolitics of the world. It's a fascinating subject. Let's see, you asked about the South China Sea.
Yeah, because I've been reading a lot about it because I'm a research geek, right? A third of the world's shipping passes through over $3 trillion in trade each year, major fisheries, oils, and gas. But you would think that nobody would allow what's happening there to happen, yet it is.
Yes, it is. The South China Sea today is like the Mediterranean was 500 years ago, with European states and the Ottoman Empire. It's like the Caribbean was 300 years ago, with the days of sail and Great Britain and Spain and France all jockeying for position in the New World. The South China Sea is the size of the country of Mexico. It's the size of the United States east of the Mississippi. And yes, all those things that you stated, certainly the shipping that goes through there, vital to all those countries in the region. About 7 countries touch it, and that all those products that are made primarily in China go around the world. So what is going on there? Those countries, led by China, are pouring dredge sand on pristine coral reefs and making military bases. And one is a place called Fiery Cross Reef. It's in the Spratly Islands. It is out in the middle of nowhere, and 5 years ago it was a pristine coral reef with little fish swimming around, and now it is an island with a 9,000-foot runway. And
9,000 feet?
And 5,000 people live on it. Now, the runway here at Naval Air Station Pensacola, a major installation, is 8,000 feet. But Fiery Cross has a 9,000-foot runway, which can operate any airplane in the world. And there are other islands around there that they have absolutely militarized. Now, why are they doing this? China thinks that the South China Sea is their blue territory, back from the days of the Tang Dynasty 1,400 years ago. You remember, right? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And the
Summarize.
To the rest of the world, this is absurd. I mean, oh, come on. This is open water. This is and you're destroying it. They don't feel that way, and they want to take care of their shipping in what they consider their home waters. The rest of the world doesn't see it, and conflict can start with a small spark, and in my latest novel, it does. And so I go through, okay, there's a spark, this very bad spark, and then my hero, Flip Wilson, gets a call, hey, you're going to deploy in 3 days and go into combat.
And that's in your third book in the series, Fight.
Yes.
Fight. Yeah. As I was reading them, it really got me thinking about what's really happening and what you wrote in the books. And I interviewed James Rollins on the radio and also live at the Vero Beach Book Center last Friday, and then Brad Taylor and Brandon Webb, a lot of military guys and guys that write books like this. James Rollins is not a military guy, but he does a lot of work with the military. And are you ever worried about your books being prophetic? I mean, like that you're giving people ideas?
My second novel, Declared Hostile, takes place in the Caribbean near Venezuela, and yes, some of the things that I have in that book are happening today, primarily with the talk of the American diplomats, the danger presented to them, Russian bombers flying to Venezuela. But these things have been happening for years, and no, it's not like Russia, Venezuela, other bad actors around the world are going to read a novel that any of us wrote and say, oh, hey, here's a good idea, let's do this. Even some of the things that are happening today in the South China Sea, my readers will say, hey, this is just like out of the headlines, and it's very similar, but it's been going on for a long time, and I think what the value of authors like us, we have some background, and we can inform people and educate them in a very entertaining way, whereas they wouldn't probably spend that much time in other media forms to get a grounding, if you will, in this area.
What made you want to write? And did that start before you left the military, that you had this enjoyment or wanted to put pen to paper, or did it happen after you left the military?
I had a writing ability that I knew I had, and as an officer, of course, you're writing all the time and reports, and I had done some professional articles. But I had a creative writing ability, and after I retired, a friend said, you should write a book, and I waved him off. Oh, go on. He says, no, listen to me, you need to write a book, you've got stories. And I said, well, maybe I should, because people would ask me at a cocktail party, what does it like to fly a fighter? And how do you really explain that without dominating? So well, it's really cool, I'll bet. But here in a novel, you can go into greater detail, and so I started writing. Maybe the kids would like to have it years from now. And when I finished Raven 1, I realized, wow, I've really got something here. And there I went. I called around to New York and trying to get it published. And then I found a friend named Jeff Edwards with Brave Ship Books, and he told me about this thing called print on demand and the Kindle, which I was aware of, and my life changed.
And your books have gotten amazing numbers and levels of reviews, some of the highest of even some of the #1 New York Times bestsellers. What do you credit that to?
I think readers appreciate the authenticity. They know that it's written by someone who has been there and done that, to use that phrase. What I try to do is make the books human. I've got human characters. They're flawed. And readers love that, because we're all flawed, and they can relate. All right, what would it be like to be in this situation, and you don't know what to do? There's all this information coming at you in say a fighter cockpit, and you've got to make the right decision every time. But they appreciate the authenticity. I had a retired Russian naval officer contact me and says, well, I can really relate. I think anyone in the military around the world can relate. And it's fascinating to get people from Australia, India, say, I really enjoyed your books. I got a lot out of them. Extremely rewarding.
Well, this is what came up for me when I was reading the 3, because my listeners know that I read. If I have a person on my show that has happened to written a book, I read the thing from cover to cover. In your case, there were 3 books, so I read 3 of them because it's a series kind of thing with the characters going through them. I was like, they have to think about all of this and then fly the plane?
It's the briefing beforehand could be well over an hour. It's probably several hours for a big combat mission, and then you go fly it, and then you'll come back and you'll spend the same amount of time going over every little thing that wasn't quite right, and the things that were right. Okay, this went well. This week we can improve on, and there's a way to do it without putting your finger in the chest of a young lieutenant and destroying him. So this is briefing and debriefing, and tactical aviators, and I would say special forces, it's a hallmark of how we get better. It's the culture of continuous improvement. I had some experience in my second life after the military teaching this to civilian organizations. That they're fascinated by it, and it does change cultures. Absolutely.
All right, so talk about this idea of continuous improvement, because my listeners a lot of them are entrepreneurs, or they work for somebody, or they've got something going on in their life and they're struggling with how to move forward. Can you explain in a few minutes some ideas from this? Well,
if you were to say, okay, Mikey, go make a sales call on this customer and tell me how it goes. Well, Mikey may not have every piece of information he needs. So if you sit down and spend some time with him, all right, you're going to visit Mr. Smith at this time, and these are the things you really must emphasize, and boom, boom, boom. And then you train Mikey up, and so he goes and conducts a call, probably with someone else, someone, holding his hand or training, if you will. And then Mikey's a qualified salesman next time. Then you come back and say, all right, well, here's the best practice. When we're talking to the client, it's a good idea to do this and this. We can stay away from this and that. And then Mikey is going to be a much more valuable employee. And so just coming back and talking about it, frankly, this is what was good, as we say, and this is what was other. And we use the word other because we have such fragile pilot egos. We don't want to use the word bad. So here's the goods, and here are the others, and then we can all learn and go out for the next event.
Well, it's interesting that you said other versus bad, because having owned my own business for 15 years and sold it, one of the hardest things in the world was that review time, or when somebody would come back and, you had a good outcome, or you had an other outcome, right? An outcome that didn't go the way you wanted, and you try to debrief and talk about it, and defenses go up, and people get angry, and it's try to have constructive criticism and whatever it may be to move it forward. How do you recommend that? What would some ideas that you would have that people can use to begin perhaps shifting their culture inside their organizations to get rid of or don't tone down that defensiveness?
It is a great question. It has to have buy-in from the front, and this is hard to do. So the boss has to say, all right, I want to hear from you. I want, when I'm falling short. And so who's the first employee that's going to do that? But some brave employee will say, well, I think you were 5 minutes late today for work. Okay, well, I'm going to work on that. You're right. I need to set a good example, and so there's an example of that. Now, as pilots, we are criticized every single day, and oftentimes by our lieutenants, and that's the right thing to do to improve us. So when it becomes a daily thing, then when you have that year-end review, it's not, hey, this is the first time I've heard of this in a year or 6 months or whatever the interval is, and you don't have those defenses.
So it's be consistent with it. Don't be mean.
Absolutely, and you're going to develop your people if you frank constructive criticism. 2 stars and a wish. You are the best salesperson we have. Everyone is so impressed with your level of knowledge, but oh my gosh, you come to work an hour late every day. So if you could just work on that, I mean, things would be great. And that's a valid thing to debrief someone on when it really happens. But if you save that, hey, you're late for work every day for a year from now, it's not going to work.
Okay. We're getting close towards the end of the show. It's amazing how fast our time goes. What's a last thought that you'd like to... Oh, and I want to make sure that people can find out how to get your books and how to reach out to you as well, Kevin. So let's start with that. How can people find you, reach out, get your books, or ask you any questions?
Kevin Miller Author is my website, and on that website, we're talking about Blue Angels. I have a blog post. I talked about my experience there. But my books are on Amazon, Raven 1, Declared Hostile, Fight, all on Amazon. I have a short story there, autobiographical, High Desert Reflections. And so on the website, you can email me and certainly leave reviews for the books. Love to hear from you.
All right. Last thought that you'd like to leave my listeners with.
Well, I think that our American military right now are the elite of our young people. 73% of our young people are not even qualified to join the military, and the days of joining the military because the judge orders you to, or not having a high school diploma, are absolutely not the case. They're just, most of our military people have some college, if not degrees, tremendous training. They learn the team focus. They learn dependability and integrity for all they do. 1% of our nation is in uniform right now, doing a wonderful job for us around the world.
And it's a beautiful career. It's something that sadly our country and the world needs military. And the show's listened to in over, I think, 30 or 40 countries in podcast recording. And I just really want to thank you, Kevin, so much for your service, not only during the time you were in service, but all you're doing for our country and the world today to help make it a better place.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. And I tell people, they thank me for my service. You're very welcome. I wouldn't trade a day of it.
Yeah, it just always amazes me, the people that run in when everybody else is running out. And I don't know where the world would be if people weren't willing to run in times of crisis.
We are very very mindful of our responsibilities as we serve, as you say, around the world. Yeah. And we do believe that we are a force for good.
Yeah, and the fact that you run in, but you don't always pull the trigger, that to me is amazing. You
right.
Balance that, knowing that there's bigger ramifications. So thank you again for being on the show. And everybody, KevinMillerAuthor.com is Kevin's website. So
thanks so much, Laura. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was so great to have you on. I'm so glad Mary Reesberg introduced us, and have a great day in Pensacola. And everybody who's listening, if you missed the first half, go to it'sallaboutthequestions.com or any podcast app to get it. And as always, the right questions can change your life. So what are you asking today? Have a great day, everyone.
You've been listening to It's All About the Questions, starring Laura Stewart. Connect with Laura at it'sallaboutthequestions.com and download a free workbook that will help you ask better questions starting today.